She was an ordinary student, friendly, cheerful, open, and sociable. She and her boyfriend looked like a young couple, like thousands of others. But behind this outward normality, something disturbing was hidden. Within a few hours, everything that had seemed harmless would turn into a tragedy. What had driven her to it? Envy, jealousy, or cold calculation? This story is not only about a crime. It is about betrayal, silence, and consequences that can never be undone. This crime shocked an entire country, and many parts of it still raise questions to this day. It was about 6:30 in the morning on what seemed to be an ordinary Wednesday, the 5th of March. The Bintara toll road in Jakarta, Indonesia, was already filled with the morning flow of traffic. Among the drivers were two professional tow truck operators who were traveling toward Pondok Indah. As they drove along the busy road, one of the men noticed something strange, an object lying between the asphalt and the grass. At first, he thought it was a discarded mannequin, but his curiosity won. He stopped the truck, drove back a short distance, and got out to check. What he saw was more terrible than he could have imagined. It was not a mannequin, but a human body. The face was bluish in color, and the hair was disheveled. The body was wearing a white shirt and black trousers. On the left arm, there was a red rubber bracelet with the words Java Jazz written on it. The condition of the body was so bad that the man could not recognize the face. Shaken, he ran back into the cab of his truck and called the police. Only a few minutes later, patrol officers arrived. They immediately covered the body with a sheet. Shortly afterward, criminal investigators also arrived. The face of the deceased young woman was blue and almost unrecognizable. It was already covered with flies. Surprisingly, however, there was almost no smell of decomposition. Suspicion immediately fell on the worst possibility. The young woman had probably been suffocated and then left by the roadside. The body was immediately taken to a hospital for an autopsy and identification. Thanks to her fingerprints and a distinctive red bracelet, the victim was identified fairly quickly. She was Ade Sara Angelina Siroto. She was only 19 years old. An important role in her identification was played by the National Electronic Passport System, which requires the mandatory collection of every citizen's fingerprints. Because of this, identity can be established quickly, even in cases where the person can no longer be recognized outwardly. The red rubber bracelet also provided a clue. It came from a local jazz festival that Ade Sara had attended only a few days earlier. This was quickly confirmed after her identity had been established. The police from Bekasi contacted the local authorities at her place of residence in the Rawamangun area of East Jakarta. Sara was a gifted student and was studying psychology. She was interested in the German language and regularly attended evening classes at an institute in Jakarta. She was the only daughter of Mr. Siroto and his wife, Elizabeth Diana. They saw her for the last time when she left the house on the 3rd of March to go to her German course. For the police, it was one of the most difficult tasks. They had to personally deliver the terrible news to Ade Sara's parents. The results of the autopsy brought the cruel truth to light. Ade Sara's body showed numerous injuries, traces of heavy blows with a blunt object inflicted shortly before her death. The cause of death was suffocation. There was no doubt. It was murder. The day before, in March, Ade Sara had attended the Java Jazz Festival. Like many Other students, she had spent a pleasant time there and had even posted about the event on social media, unaware of the fate that awaited her. For Adi Sara's father, Mr. Soroto, the news was a shock, especially because he had only just filed a missing person report for his daughter when the police officers arrived at the door with the dreadful news. On the morning of Monday the 3rd of March, 2014, Ade Sara said goodbye to her father, who drove her to Klender Station. From there, she planned to go to her university. In the evening, she had a German course at the institute at 6:30. That was last time her parents saw their daughter alive. According to some sources, she had mentioned that day that she would spend the night at a friend's house. The next day, the 4th of March, her father thought that the battery of her mobile phone had simply run out. He hoped he would be able to reach her later, but when he had received no message from her by 10 o'clock at night, he began to worry seriously. Seized by anxiety, he went looking for her, checked every possible place where she might be, and questioned her acquaintances. But no one knew where she was. The next day, the family reported her missing. When Ade Sara's parents were asked to identify the body, they could not recognize her. Her face was badly disfigured, and her body was covered with wounds. Her relatives were left with pain and many questions. What had happened to Ade Sara in her final hours, and who could have committed such a cruel crime? It turned out that Ade Sara had not appeared at her German course on the 3rd of March. Her teacher, the 22-year-old Nadia Amanda Prativi, began to worry. Ade Sara had never been late. By 8 o'clock in the evening, Nadia tried to call her twice, but without success. No one answered. The investigators began questioning her friends and soon came across an important clue. It turned out that Ade Sara had written to a friend and mentioned that she was going to meet a girl named Asifa at Gandangdia Station. The 18-year-old Asifa had asked her for advice about enrolling in a German course. However, the situation was complicated by the fact that Asifa was in a relationship with Ade Sara's ex-boyfriend, Hafid, a young man whom Ade Sara tried to avoid in every possible way. Ade Sara and Hafid had a difficult past. Both were young and had gone to the same school. Their relationship lasted about a year until Ade Sara found out about Hafid's infidelity. He refused to admit his guilt, and eventually they broke up. Later, Hafid tried to restart the relationship, but Ade Sara remained firm. She did not want to look back. According to Ade Sara's mother, Elizabeth, Hafid seemed like a polite, friendly, caring, and very romantic young man. He came from a wealthy family. His father was a doctor. She knew that Ade Sara had broken up with Hafid after learning about his affair. Later, during questioning, the German teacher Nadia told the police that Ade Sara had confided in her about how difficult the breakup had been for her and that Hafid had been jealous, intrusive, and possessive. During their relationship, he could appear loving and caring. But behind his free tenderness was a pathological need to control everything. Perhaps the betrayal was the final straw, and the breakup was the long-awaited liberation from suffocating bonds. Ade Sara wanted to completely cut off all contact with him. She deleted all their photos together from her phone and was determined to move on. The perfect gift for the Advent season. Available on Amazon. Link in the description. Hafid, however, had no intention of giving up. His attempts to win her back were more like obsessive stalking. Their Their differing religious views only strengthened Ade Sara's determination to end the relationship. But Hafifi continued harassing her on social media and even went so far as to hire a hacker to break into her accounts. Although he was already in a relationship with Asifa, Hafid continued seeking contact with Ade Sara, and Asifa knew about it. After a meeting arranged for the 3rd of March, Ade Sara was never seen again. Her friend from the German course, Adi, also raised the alarm. The next day, she posted a photo of the young woman on social media with the caption, "Missing, last seen on the afternoon of the 3rd of March at Gandangdia station." This new information led the police to take a closer look at Ade Sara's ex-boyfriend, Ahmad Imam al-Hafid, or simply Hafid. Investigators suspected that his obsessive fixation on her, together with the fact that his current girlfriend Asifa had met Ade Sara on the very day she disappeared, was no coincidence. On the 5th of March, investigators visited the hospital again to obtain the results of Ade Sara's autopsy. There, they also questioned her friends who had gathered at the hospital to say goodbye to their beloved friend. They described her as a good, cheerful, and very kind young woman. The atmosphere in the hospital was oppressive. Grief and confusion filled the air. The autopsy results revealed terrible details about the final hours of Ade Sara's life. When she was found, her body had bruises on her arms, neck, and legs. Her face was bluish, barely recognizable, and her mouth had been stuffed with newspaper. The cause of death was suffocation. A piece of newspaper had become lodged in her throat. Numerous bruises indicated that she had been beaten with a blunt object. According to the forensic report, the torture continued for several hours until death occurred. Among those who came to the hospital to say goodbye to Ade Sara were her ex-boyfriend Hafid and his current girlfriend Asifa. Both appeared shocked, expressed their condolences, and even posted angry messages on social media in which they cursed whoever was responsible for Ade Sara's death. Hafidi seemed especially downcast and sad, and quietly blended in among the grieving friends. During questioning, however, the police found that Hafid did not have a convincing alibi for the evening of Ade Sara's disappearance. Some sources also reported that he had a bite wound on his hand. The next day, the 6th of March, the police arrested Hafid at 4 o'clock in the afternoon directly at the hospital, while he was still publicly mourning the victim. Under the pressure of the evidence, Hafid confessed to his crime fairly quickly. He admitted that his girlfriend Asifa had been involved in the crime. She was arrested an hour later. What particularly disturbed the investigators was that neither suspect showed even a spark of remorse. During the interrogations, they smiled and displayed a disturbing indifference toward the seriousness of their act. Hafid and Asifa confessed that Ade Sara had been killed inside a small Kia Visto on the way from South Jakarta to East Jakarta. She was brutally beaten and tortured for several hours until she suffocated. Further investigation helped reconstruct the horrifying sequence of events from the moment Hafid and Asifa lured Ade Sara into the trap until her agonizing death. The tragic events of the 3rd of March unfolded with frightening precision. The plan that led to Ade Sara's death had been prepared in advance by Hafid. He asked his girlfriend Asifa to arrange a meeting with Ade Sara under the pretext of asking about German lessons. The plan was for them to meet at the station and go to the lesson together. Hafid claimed that this was the only way he could see Ade Sara, since she had refused to meet him. Asifa later admitted that she and Hafidid had planned to kidnap Ade Sara and possibly kill her together. The meeting took place at around 5:30 in the afternoon. When Ade Sara approached Asifa, she was friendly and grateful. But soon Hafidid appeared, supposedly by coincidence nearby, and offered to give them a ride. It is unclear exactly what Asifa said, but somehow she managed to persuade Ade Sara to get into the car. At that point, there was still no suspicion. On the contrary, Hafid actually drove the girls to the location of their German class in central Jakarta. Both got out of the car. Then, Hafid and Asifa staged a fake argument during which he demanded that Asifa get back into the car. She allegedly turned to Ade Sara in tears and begged her not to let her ride alone with Hafid. Exactly what they said to each other in that moment is not known. But perhaps Sara felt pity for the girl as she remembered her own painful experiences with Hafid. Moved by the scene of the argument, she decided not to leave the two of them alone and got into the car with them. But as soon as Ade Sara was inside the car, a real nightmare began. The situation changed instantly. Hafid and Asifa began beating Ade Sara. Afraid that she might escape, Asifa suggested a cruel method to keep her inside, persuading her to take off her clothes. In her view, the shame of standing without clothing in a conservative society would make Ade Sara stay in the car. She even tried to undress Ade Sara herself, but Ade Sara resisted and chose to undress herself to avoid further humiliation. At around 7 o'clock in the evening, the violence escalated. Hafid kicked Ade Sara in the throat, hit her with his hands, and then struck her several times with a stun device. Asifa also took part in the abuse. She hit Ade Sara with her shoes. To suppress her screams, Asifa stuffed newspaper into her mouth. According to the perpetrator's confessions, the abuse eventually caused Ade Sara to lose consciousness. At around 9:25 in the evening, Asifa checked her pulse. Her heart was no longer beating. She also felt no breathing. Ironically, at exactly that moment, according to the suspects, problems with the car began. The vehicle broke down several times during the night. The couple panicked because they did not know what to do with the body or how to cover up their crime. Asifa tried to hide Ade Sara's body by sitting it upright, with the head tilted slightly to the side so it would look as if she were sleeping. The first breakdown happened near the apartments in Kemayoran, where Hafid tried to ask a taxi driver for help charging the battery, but after only 200 meters, the car stopped again. This happened repeatedly. The car broke down several times throughout the night. They kept driving, presumably with Ade Sara's lifeless body on the back seat. I want to point out that this is their own version of events. The only thing that is certain is the chronology. It is highly likely that they themselves spread this version in order to present their actions in a more favorable light. It cannot be ruled out that Ade Sara was still alive and drifting between consciousness and unconsciousness while they continued their dark scheme. At around 2 o'clock at night, as they were driving through Kemayoran, the car broke down again. At that point, Asifa dressed Sara in her own clothes. At 4 o'clock in the morning on the 4th of March, Hafid called a friend to help him with the battery. When the friend arrived, he asked who was sitting in the back seat. Hafid calmly said it was a corpse. The friend took this as a macabre joke and did not react. When the car started again, they looked for a repair shop, but could not find one in the area. Only at 5:30 in the afternoon did they find a repair shop in Salemba. All that time, Sara's body remained lying on the back seat, covered with a pashmina that belonged to a Saifa. After the car was repaired, they continued driving in order to dispose of Sara's body. At some point, they turned off her mobile phone to hide their location. At 9 o'clock in the evening, they drove onto the Bekasi-Bintara toll road. At kilometer 41, they threw Sara's body, without any compassion, by the roadside. Then they drove toward Bekasi and disposed of various pieces of evidence along the way: tissues, newspaper scraps, and Sara's wallet. After that, they stopped at a shop, tried to compose themselves, and threw away the remaining evidence, including their shoes and her bag. Then they went home. According to a Saifa's statement, the body had already been in the car for 21 hours at the time it was disposed of. After the brutal murder, Hafidi did not forget to get rid of Sara's personal belongings. He not only threw away her bag and wallet, but also sold her mobile phone in a shopping center for 4 million Indonesian rupiah. This information was confirmed by the head of public relations of the Bekasi police, who added that before selling the phone, Hafid had even asked a friend for advice. Meanwhile, Aljay and Galang, two of Hafid's friends, who had studied with him at the same university, were also questioned by the police. According to the available information, they were the ones who had seen Sara's body in Hafid's car. During the investigation, important evidence was found: scraps of newspaper, the victim's student ID card, her identity card, her savings book, her bank card, and a stun device. All of this was discovered in a ditch in front of Hafid's house. The car, Kia Visto, was also confiscated. Among the physical evidence was also a pair of women's shoes, with which, according to investigators, the suspect had beaten Sara. What was the motive for this crime? According to the police, Hafidi acted out of resentment and anger. After the breakup, Sara had cut off all contact with him. He could not accept that she had decided to move on with her life. With every passing day, his irritation grew, and Sara did not want him back. That drove him mad. He wanted to teach her a lesson and make her feel his pain. Atsifa, on the other hand, was afraid of being abandoned. According to her statements, she felt threatened by the possibility that Hafid might return to Sara. In some of her statements, she even claimed that she herself had become a victim. The investigators later addressed this separately. It is notable that it is hardly surprising that it was Saifa who suggested humiliating Sara by stripping her. She was the one who stuffed newspaper into her mouth, and that ultimately became the main cause of her death. Despite their claim that they had originally planned only a kidnapping, the possession of a stun device and the prolonged beating clearly argue against the idea that they did not intend serious harm. The fact that they did not seek help, did not try to save her, but instead calmly sold her phone, threw away her belongings, and left her body by the side of the road, shows a shocking coldness and cruelty. Sara was often described as beautiful and charismatic, just like her mother. But when her body was found, she was so disfigured that even her father could not recognize her. That is how cruel the crime was. In the case of Hafid and Saifa, perhaps their original goal was not to kill her. They wanted to humiliate Sara. However, The ruthless and careless way in which they carried out the act left no doubt that they were indifferent to the life of their victim. This raises serious doubts about their true intentions. Even according to their own version of events, they did not check Sara's condition, even though she was unconscious. That only strengthens the doubts about the credibility of their account. During the trial, Hafiti and Asifa ended their relationship and sat separately from each other in the courtroom. Asifa tried to present herself as an unwilling participant, claiming that she had obeyed out of fear of Hafiti and the possible consequences of refusing. However, this version clearly contradicted the original statements she had made during interrogation. Both were found guilty of premeditated murder. At the court hearing on the 9th of December, 2014, Hafit and Asifa were sentenced to 20 years in prison. During the trial, Asifa declared, "I never had the intention, let alone a plan, to kill the victim. I did not prepare any objects that could have been used to kill her." These words sounded like a desperate attempt to shift responsibility. She continued, "Actually, I did not even think about it, and I could not have imagined that the newspaper we only wanted to use to stop her mouth so she would not scream would ultimately lead to her death." Asifa claimed that Hafit had been the main initiator and executor of the torture. He had allegedly used a stun device several times. She portrayed herself as a passive participant and admitted only that she had slapped Sara and committed minor acts. "That was not my intention," Asifa said. "I acted on Hafit's orders." In the cramped space of the car, in a state of fear and oppression, I was confused and did not know what to do. Her voice trembled as she described the fear and panic that, according to her own words, had completely overwhelmed her that night. Asifa tried to portray herself as a victim by saying, "When I saw Hafit abusing her, I simply stayed silent. I was afraid to see what he was doing. In my panic and emotional instability, I simply did what Hafiti ordered me to do because I was afraid he would do the same thing to me." Given Hafiti's hot-tempered and aggressive character, her statement painted the picture of a girl oppressed by fear and subjected to manipulation. The climax of her story occurred after the verdict was announced. According to eyewitness reports, Asifa lost consciousness as she was led out of the courtroom. On the 9th of July, 2015, the Supreme Court granted the prosecution's appeal and increased the sentence for both of them. Hafit and Asifa were sentenced to life imprisonment. With this decision, they became among the youngest people in Indonesia ever to receive such a harsh sentence. The court also noted that Sara was the only child in her family. This was an irreplaceable loss for Sara's parents, a pain that will never pass. With her death, an entire line, a dynasty, was extinguished. This cruelty could not be ignored. That probably played a decisive role both in the cultural assessment of the tragedy and in the severity of the court's judgment. Do you believe that the murder of Sara was planned in advance? Or was it a kidnapping, an assault that went out of control and ended in tragedy? This case triggered a wave of public outrage across Indonesia. Especially shocking was the fact that the perpetrators were so young. The act led to a broad social debate about the problem of youth violence. When you look at the social profiles of the accused, Asifa seemed like a completely ordinary girl. After the breakup with Sara, Hafidi wrote insulting posts on social media, humiliated her, and even tried to hack her online accounts. Violence among young people, including physical aggression and even murder, remains alarmingly widespread around the world. In the United States, for example, murder is the third most common cause of death among teenagers between the ages of 15 and 19. We often think that terrible things happen somewhere far away, that evil is an abstraction, that such things do not happen to us or to the people we know. But Sara was a completely ordinary young woman. She studied, laughed, helped others, and one day she simply did not come home. In this story, there are no monsters with masks, only people. People who made a decision. One allowed himself to be guided by his anger, the other allowed her fear to turn her into an accomplice, and society watched or looked away. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.